Media recognition from Bloomberg, Reuters, recycling trade publications. Patented process for 100% recovery of critical metals, including cobalt, lithium, nickel, manganese, aluminum. American Manganese is focused on recycling lithium-ion batteries for electric vehicles. American Manganese trades on the TSX Venture, AMY, the US, AMYZF, and Frankfurt 2AM. For more information, visit AmericanManganeseInc.com or phone me, Larry Ray, at 778-574-4444.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the Resource Works Society. Welcome back to the show, Stewart.
Hey, thanks, Jim.
Stewart, the Canadian government has a new cabinet. The Minister of Environment is an avowed anti-pipeliner. What kind of impact is this cabinet going to have on Canada's energy industry and the Canadian economy as a whole?
Yeah, well, the appointment of Stephen Guilbeault to the role of Environment and Climate Change Minister certainly got people going in Alberta. And not surprisingly, I mean, he's been a figure who, before getting into politics, he was with Greenpeace. He was with a group from Quebec called Equiterre that got well known to Albertans around 2016 as part of some interesting stuff around the future of the oil sands. Actually, it was kind of constructive in a way, which is perhaps a little unexpected. But I think there's an expectation in Alberta, and we've seen Premier Jason Kenney immediately react yesterday with the statement that it's a very problematic appointment. And so one might ask, well, what does he mean? I think what he means is that if someone has made a career protesting the oil sands in, these very visible stunts that Greenpeace is known for, is that someone you want to have in charge of a very significant environmental portfolio in a country whose major export product is, in fact, crude oil, the thing that this new minister says he opposes. And in fact, when he was appointed to cabinet, initially as heritage minister, this came up. I mean, the question was, how can you go into the Trudeau cabinet, a cabinet that supports, say, the TMX pipeline to the West Coast, when you oppose it? And he said, well, I'll take the appointment, but I still oppose the pipeline and I still hate the oil sands. And apparently Trudeau said that's okay, and there was no problem with that. I mean, that tells you a lot about the sort of way that the current government operates, I guess. And back when Alberta was going through initial conflict on the oil sands, his group opposed the oil sands, but they were also part of a constructive discourse that led to what many people call the grand bargain amongst environmentalists and First Nations and industry and the Alberta government, where there was a cap put on emissions from the oil sands of 100 megatons. I remember this at the time. It was around, I think 70 megatons at the time. So there was actually quite a bit of room where this group had got together and said, look, even though we have different views on things, and that included Stephen Guilbeault, we can agree that the projected growth of the oil sands to a point can increase. And also, as long as the oil sands keeps lowering its emissions and keeping the production up but the emissions down, we're okay with that. So all those who got on the podium for the photo op back then in 2015 or 2016 thought they had a deal. And I actually thought it was a constructive occurrence because it gave a path for Canada to be able to continue to produce a commodity that the world needs, that Canadians need and use every day. Like there's not one Canadian, Jim, who doesn't benefit in some direct way every day by using products. And even if people say, well, I'm going to have no products from oil in my life, it'd be very hard to do. But moreover, the money that is derived from selling crude oil, mainly to the States, because we lack pipelines to get the oil to the world where it would fetch more money, those benefits, if you're going to see the doctor, if you're walking down the road or the sidewalk, going to school or university, you're actually benefiting from crude oil. So I don't think there's anyone who could actually truthfully say they don't participate in this. And I think it's therefore incumbent upon, everyone to be engaged in this debate on how the energy economy in Canada, progresses and improves. So what I think here, Jim, is that although Stephen Guilbeault is a flashpoint appointment, and maybe there is some political machination there to do with how the Liberals would proceed from being a minority to hope to get the majority that presumably they covet. I think Guilbeault might, in the current context where we have this, climate problem, and we have the Glasgow COP26 conference just opening, potentially be someone who could actually, you might be surprised to hear me say this, but potentially be part of a solution, where that solution is finding the way to innovate, to improve, to, take the stuff out of oil that we want to leave in the ground and actually leave it in the ground, and then the benefits from oil that are wanted and needed, that are safely extracted. And when we have technologies like hydrogen and carbon capture, we can actually do that. And we can do that too with the petrochemical industry that creates thousands of products that don't necessarily create emissions. And we forget that, there's probably very few garments that people have in their closet that aren't, treated in some form with a synthetic substance derived from oil. It's not just about jumping in your car and driving. Oil is so much more than that. So, call me naive, call me just a foolish optimist if you want, but I think there's a path there for Stephen Guilbeault in this role of environment minister to do things that lead to, climate progress and the things that everyone wants to see, as well as not abandoning the very thing that creates Canada today and every day as a prosperous country, a member of the G7, a place where you can hope your child can get a good job and advance through life, and away from being a sort of a Argentina or Greece economy, which would kind of be what would happen if we just simply did all the things that Stephen Guilbeault used to preach for. So if he's grown up a bit and become a pragmatist and progressive scientific in his thinking, then I think we could actually have a decent outcome. But you know what? It could be a rocky path before things settle down.
We've heard from the Bank of Canada that they're ending quantitative easing, and we can look forward to higher interest rates perhaps as early as April. But of course, does the Bank of Canada really control what happens to Canada financially?
Yeah, the easy answer there is we tend to be the tail, not the dog, in anything like this. So this is a reflection of that. I think the bigger worry on the topics we usually talk about is, what does this mean for investment? What does it mean for affordability for Canadians? If things, interest rates going up, that means the cost of money is going up, and inflation going up means prices are higher, and we burn more money as individuals to pay the heating bills and educate our kids and feed ourselves and so on. And where do we get the new money to offset that? Do we get it from a raise that the boss is giving us? Well, wages have a habit in Canada these days for a long time of not going up. All the other costs are going up. Housing's going up, but a house in Vancouver might double over a few years. Is your paycheck doubling in those same years? No, that's not what's happening. So you add inflation to this already problematic situation. You've got, suddenly what's theoretical, the economy to, a lot of folks is very real.
So if you're in the natural resources industry with the cabinet, it seems that Canada, who's one of the most naturally richest countries in the world, have we just decided that we're going to be a survival economy and have currency crises every few years, like you said, Greece or Argentina?
Well, there's a range of scenarios that you could hypothesize. That's certainly one of them. I don't think it's, a likely one. I think it's possible. If there's a sort of a serial chain of bad decisions, it's not inconceivable. There are bad outcomes for countries that were in a good place, not without precedent. We don't want to become that cautionary tale. And so I think, for those who recognize the source of stability in our country is that we have an export based economy, a small trading economy that allows us to get money to buy the things we need. I mean, it's really pretty simple. Economics is not complicated. Really good, gifted economists can explain economics to you. Mediocre ones just confuse you and make you think you're stupid because you can't understand their charts and formulas. But the gifted ones, it's really just how do humans make decisions about allocating the resources they have. That's the fundamental. And I think if we make those decisions badly, and we allow exports to decline, and then we don't have money to buy things, then we won't be able to get the things we want, whether that's vaccines or orange juice or iPhones or, all the other things that we use but don't make ourselves. That's what trade is. And, unfortunately, suppliers of trade goods have an annoying habit of wanting to be paid. So if we can't pay them, they won't give us the goods. It's just that simple, Jim. And we could very well get onto a slippery slope of, if let's remove this from the economy. Let's just get rid of, that export item. We don't like it. Some people, feel it's harmful and can't be improved. I think the most corrosive thing, the most dangerous idea that I've seen recently was actually in the Globe and Mail, an opinion writer saying it's time to stop investing in innovation in Canadian oil and gas. We should put all of the innovation into renewables. That is the most disturbing thing I've ever read, I think, because 80% of our energy needs are served by hydrocarbons, by oil and gas or fossil fuels. And if we fail to innovate in how we use those, we will fail to have energy. Now, for a long time, the world has been coasting on a lot of good economic conditions, and we've been able to have this disconnect between the so-called new economy and the so-called old economy. And just recently, especially in Europe, the end of that era has arrived with high energy prices, with a failure of renewables to supply the amount of energy that some starry-eyed optimists in energy policy expected that they would deliver, just because of just the singular natural phenomenon of less wind. If you heavily invest in wind and you start shutting down your electricity grid or your generating sources that were hydrocarbon based because you think there will just always be plentiful wind, and then there isn't, well, what do? Well, you buy it from Vladimir Putin. You could ask, hey, Canada, can you get us some? And Canada has to say, well, sorry, we couldn't build a pipeline through Quebec to get you clean gas and get you LNG, so you could have at least a cleaner alternative in your electrical mix, with Canadian gas instead of coal. I mean, I know there are those voices you always hear. If it's not perfect, if the solution you offer isn't perfect, then you can't have it. It's no good at all. Well, that's not how we work in our families. I mean, you deal with the imperfect. You modify, you repair, you compromise, you put things away for a rainy day. That's how normal people live. And the idea that there's this sort of giant switch that, someone's stopping from being moved to this nirvana of energy where no energy source causes any harm or has any negatives to it. I mean, there's no such state. So really it's all about how are we innovating. And I'm seeing, for example, last week, a group of Canadian companies, oil sands players, most of it in, different parts of the world, different, some are in natural gas, but mainly oil. They came out with a new initiative, Pathways. It's about achieving net zero. And that's where they're seeking to go. And they actually have a credible plan to do that. They've looked at the numbers. They've said, okay, to get there, we need to do this, this, and this. And here's what we're going to do. I think people should be jumping for joy that this is happening because it's going to allow the enormous benefits of crude oil exports to continue if we can achieve the kind of progress in that we should. So when you hear someone say, Jim, we should stop innovating in oil and gas because I would prefer the world to be a perfect place of unicorns and pink rainbows all the time, and to get there, all we have to do is have renewables and put all the innovation money in there. That's just it's ridiculous.
The transition from the horse to the automobile took decades and decades and decades. Even in World War II, most people don't realize the Germans, although Blitzkrieg was their brand name, mechanized infantry and so on, their artillery was always towed by horses. And horses were the major part of their supply chain, and they used millions of horses to move stuff around. So, even as late as the 1940s, horses were still part of the transportation chain.
Mm-hmm.
We'll have more with Stewart Muir right after this.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Stewart Muir. Stewart, the financial benefits of natural gas. Now, it's only in the last few years that they've started making natural gas some kind of an evil entity. But compared to burning coal, how much cleaner is it? And what's, say, the cost benefit of getting just one of those giant LNG tankers to Asia from BC?
Yeah. Well, one thing about BC is we've got plenty of natural gas. It's an abundant substance. It exists in the shale formations of the northeast part of the province that are broadly part of the Western Sedimentary Basin. It is extracted using hydraulic fracturing, which is almost a miracle of technology, a whole bunch of different technologies that came together, kind of like the way the iPhone or smartphones generally are a whole bunch of different technologies that were put together to create this miraculous change. And fracking, as it's called by its detractors, or hydraulic fracturing, which is the correct term, is the way to do that. And we have this combination of resources and technology and geographic position that is part of the global clean energy shift. So being able to get natural gas as an alternative in your mix, it's reliable, it can be quite cost effective, and it's obviously desired around the world where people pay a lot of money for it. And just to get an idea of that, I mean, we are seeing this crisis right now of a shortage of energy. Not just in Europe, but in China, in Asia, all over the place. You've got factories being shut down, because of, electricity being too expensive. It's going to have grave consequences for people in all sorts of countries. But with LNG, which is the export or the shippable form of natural gas, liquefied natural gas, so it's chilled, very, very cold, and it is about 1/700th of the volume of natural gas once it's chilled like that. So you can literally pour it. It's a liquid, LNG. You pour it into the hold of a ship or into the specialized cargo ship for LNG, and off it goes. So I'm sure most people in BC know the nuts and bolts of that. But for anyone else who's new to the story, that's a bit of background. Now, what's the value of this? I always knew it had a lot of value. I mean, why would you make these billion-dollar investments if it wasn't valuable? But recently, we got some evidence out of Asia of the value of a cargo of LNG once it's put in a ship. So, as of a week ago, one shipload of LNG is selling for $110 million US. Now, the new LNG Canada project in Kitimat is going to, when it's fully complete, ship 350 shiploads a year, 350 cargoes. And I just did a little back of the napkin math on that. If you convert it to Canadian dollars and work out, what is the full, it's almost $50 billion a year in, value added to Canadian trade. When you consider that total exports from Canada today of goods, not services, are under $200 billion. So we're adding more than a quarter to the existing, just by one project that is monetizing Canadian gas for a positive climate outcome. It is such a no-brainer to be in it, which is why people are in it and investing, in this case, $40 billion to develop that opportunity. So you can see why there is such excitement at the government level. I mean, they're not getting, $50 billion a year into government coffers. What they're getting is, it varies over time, and the formula is kind of complex. But 3.5% for a certain period of the value of the LNG ship goes to the BC government, and that's only part of the benefits to the public.
Carol Taylor, when she was BC's finance minister, told me she had nightmares about the price of natural gas falling by just 1 or 2 cents because it meant tens of millions of dollars to the BC Treasury. Just 1 or 2 cents difference in the price. Well, we've seen the price jump in dollars, not pennies.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. It depends on like any other commodity, on what supply and demand is. Right now, there's a very high demand. So I wouldn't expect that the price situation that I've described is necessarily something that will exist into the future. I believe it will come back down as supply evens out and some of the other issues are dealt with. But you know what? Given policy direction, I mean, there is a kind of concern that what's been happening, say, in the UK and parts of Western Europe could happen to other countries as well, where political decisions are made to change the energy system without giving adequate due consideration to what we have to replace that energy. And if that happens, it translates to human suffering, not just, headlines that are bad. It really matters if people can't afford to heat their homes in winter in a northern climate. If they can't afford to grow food because it's too expensive to manufacture fertilizer, which requires natural gas. If they can't, put fuel in the gas tank of the school bus and can't get their kids to school, well, that's human suffering that can come out of this. And, it seems to have happened kind of by accident. People weren't asking the right questions. There's this disconnect between urban and rural life today, not just in Canada. It's very evident in Canada, but I think in lots of other places. And so there's kind of assumption that, you pick up your phone and dial something up on Skip the Dishes, and by some miracle, who knows how it happens, that food shows up on your doorstep a few minutes later, and you've got some a burger with some bread and some meat and some mayo, and you've got potatoes, it's wrapped in foil and it's in a paper bag, and someone drove it there in a car. How did that happen? By what miracle did that happen? Well, yeah, we know why that happened. And then if you're pursuing policies to erase the existence of, those inputs, and everyone's affected, by the way, by this stuff, agriculture, there's no one out there really parading around, stop farming, but actually there are people trying to stop farming of different things that they wish other people didn't eat. And also, issues on environment. I mean, environmental issues are real, and the public has an interest in sorting them out, making sure that we have solutions to problems that occur, but it doesn't mean we just stop living. I don't think anyone's voting for that.
How do farmers dry their grain if they don't have natural gas or propane?
Yeah, right now they don't have a way. There's probably someone who would say, well, just use solar panels. Well, physics is physics, and it's not subject to public opinion. And that's another thing that we found, just sort of the wishful thinking that, well, we'll just do this and it'll all work out. And, it's one of those things that can lead to polarization in society when it shouldn't. We should be driving towards solutions that benefit everybody. And, I think there are issues that are bigger that are driving some of those polarizations. It's not, necessarily about you shouldn't be eating that steak, or you shouldn't be driving that kind of car, or taking that sort of holiday. I think there's a lot of alienation in today's society. People are also struggling to be part of social networks that are real, that aren't just, on your computer, in a time when mobility has meant families are scattered and friend networks are kind of different than maybe they were in past times. So people want to affiliate with movements. They want to feel they're doing something that's valuable, that makes a difference. And, if something's offered to do that, maybe it's a polarizing thing, but it feels good to be part of. I think that's something that before we have solutions to just the physical issues, we also need to be thinking about that. How do we have a more inclusive society so that, people aren't saying, oh, I'm left out of this, so I'm just going to go and, knock it over if I can. And I kind of see that happening more than I ever have.
Stewart, anything else you want to bring up during today's show?
I just want to mention, one thing we don't talk about so much, but it's super important, is energy efficiency. And that's something that, 2/3 of energy is wasted because of, heat dissipating. It's part of it. It's a big, major reason why we waste so much energy, but there's other ways as well. So, when we hear all the news reports out of Glasgow over the next few days, it'll be along the lines of, no more fossil fuel infrastructure, no more this, no more that, we have to stop this. Some of that stuff is just not going to be realistic tomorrow. In 100 years, I think the world will be probably more like what they're talking about in Glasgow. Until we get to that point through investment in technology, in committing to innovation in the reliable fuel solutions we have today, until we get there, we have to do a lot of other things. One of those things is that fuel efficiency and energy efficiency. And, it's like it's right there. It's right under our noses being wasted. Let's use it for something. Meantime, we've got Bitcoin turning into this major guzzler of energy. I don't want to sound like a stick in the mud who doesn't understand the fantastic future of cryptocurrency. Nevertheless, I'm not sure how the existence of cryptocurrency has created any benefit for me personally. How about you, Jim?
Not exactly, no.
Not exactly. Yeah, I know there's someone listening to this maybe driving around in a Rolls who says, no, crypto has done a lot for me. Okay, well, that's great. I'm glad. But, for most people, I think it's sort of an abstraction, and it's using a ton of energy. So, we need to look at all this stuff and make sure that we're putting the right priorities in the right place, that, we start with the basics. People need to live. And you know what? We want to live well. People, expect in Canada to live well. And why shouldn't we?
Now, of course, we know Bitcoin requires a lot of electricity to be so-called mined. That's why China has banned it for the meanwhile, but they may go back to it because the Chinese also realize if there's some value in this, we don't want to miss out. North Vancouver's the first city in the world that will use the excess heat generated from Bitcoin to help heat 100 commercial properties, I believe. And that story came to us from our friend of the show, Steve Soretsky. So there are ways to use this and get more efficiency. And in Vancouver's Olympic Village area, all the heat generated when you wash dishes and wash clothes, well, they capture some of that heat in the sewer lines going out of the Olympic Village and recycle that heat. So there are ways to be more energy efficient. We just have to put our puny little human brains to it, and voila, we do come up with solutions. But these things all take time, and they also take a lot of money.
They do indeed.
Stewart, thank you so much for chatting with us.
Thanks, Jim.
My guest has been Stewart Muir, Executive Director of the ResourceWorks Society. His website, resourceworks.com. You can find him on Twitter at SJ Muir. If you have any questions for Stewart, you can send them to info@howstreet.com. Our YouTube channel is Talk Digital Network. We're also on Facebook. I'm Jim Goddard. Thank you for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com radio is a production of HowStreet Media Incorporated.